Hey folks, my name is Seth. You're watching the Business of Cyber series on LinkedIn. Really excited. Got an amazing guest speaker today that I'll introduce here shortly. But it's been a couple of weeks since the last time we engaged. I just wanted to tell you that there's a lot going on in the critical sector, and it's great to have this show be able to bring folks on. We're all the way planned out all the way into the middle, almost in the middle of August. And today. Oh, my screen went blank, but I think we're still good. Today, we're going to be talking about the connected worker. And where does the connected worker sit within the critical sectors? Where does it sit within the OT market? Well, it's interesting. I've seen a lot of trends towards digitization, towards connecting, towards data management, data flow, data elimination, dashboarding. And so there's this big push in some companies, especially those forward-leaning right now, to connect everything to everyone and get more data out in the field. But what are the implications of that? As somebody who's all about digitization of standardized workflows, I'm all on board. What are the security implications? I know that that's something that people think about in the security world, and they're doing so through the lens of the foundation of what the Business of Cyber series was founded. And that was there's not enough time, there's not enough budget, and there's definitely enough people to accomplish our security roadmap. So today, I've got a special guest coming on board, Ronaldo, who we met actually at the CS4CA Houston event earlier in March. Ronaldo, thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Very happy to be here.
Yes. So how we got started, just a little bit of a story, is that you gave a presentation on connected worker recently, right? You want to give just a little bit of overview of what we've been talking about this for the last quarter or so? What's kind of different on the strategic side of how you're helping the community out?
Right. So when I was at the Connected Worker, it was around developing a comprehensive OT security strategy, and it was really talking about kind of like how do we build up that program and the different areas that we have to address that. Now coming back to this series, for this podcast, it's really diving more into about the connected worker environment. What are the different things that are happening? What are the different considerations we got to think about cybersecurity, and just how do we think about the connected workers, the way they're coming to the environment? So it's a lot of interesting direction that it's taking, and a lot of things we need to be aware of.
Yeah, very much so. And when we came up with this particular topic, we haven't had anybody on connected work. We haven't talked about wearables, right? And I'm excited to do so because I know that digitization and connecting workforce, it is, in my estimate, it sits at a high priority with some of these assets that are out there. So excited to talk to you about it today. As we move over just into the agenda real quick, you'll be able to see, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the latest trends that we're headed in that as far as connected workers are concerned. We're going to be talking about the importance of it, but we're also going to be talking about many of the different security programs associated and the security concerns associated with it. But before we do, Ronaldo, would you please give the audience a little bit of your background so that they can understand kind of where you ended upon connected worker as a major initiative?
Right. Yes. So thank you. So really, it's my background. Like I've been in the industry for more than 18 plus years, doing a lot of different areas. Started with networking. Actually, I came from the IT side, so my background started with networking side, doing consulting and doing supporting customers across U.S. and other countries, and then just over the years, just pivoted over to the security side, network security, and got into cybersecurity. So I've been supporting a lot of the infrastructure and enterprise side architecture for right now I work for Cummins. Before I was at United Airlines, and prior to that I was at Cisco. So got a lot of background and around the architecture and just dove into the OT side. So really supporting the direction on how we think about cybersecurity from the OT and working with those teams, and just being in the manufacturing compared to the aviation space is just it's different verticals, but a lot of very similar components and challenges. So it doesn't deviate so much in terms of the issues run into, but it's still the same kind of hurdles you have to get through.
Understood. Renaud, can you hear me well? Or is that...
Yeah, I do hear it's a little bit far, but I hear you.
I'm gonna play with it a little bit. No, I'm gonna try different mics. Test 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me better there? Still not. Okay. I'm gonna keep going with this if you can hear me. So great. Listen, let's dive into the first kind of real chapter. Let's talk about the different trends that you see in Industry 4.0, digital transformation in general.
Yeah. So really, it's a few different areas. I mean, it's like anything from artificial intelligence, machine learning, on the kind of predictive maintenance that is becoming more prevalent. You have a lot more of this AI components being brought into the digital transformation journey. The edge computing side about bringing the data or process the data closer to the source, closer to the endpoints. You got your IoT, IoT, your industrial Internet of Things, where you have a lot more adoption of these smart related capabilities, or these smart factories are bringing in more connected devices. You also have the digital twins, where you take a virtual environment, I mean, where you take a physical environment and you replicate into some kind of virtual environment, like a virtual space. So it's really interesting trend to see how that's evolving and trying to replicate that environment. You get the 5G also. In your manufacturing and even in other areas, what's common or traditional way is connecting devices, wired and wireless. Well, wireless has become much more used in these different areas, but then you have some challenges around wireless of either dead spots or connectivity. So then 5G is coming in, where they bring in this kind of more like localized private connectivity using cellular connectivity. Additive type manufacturing, where you have more like 3D printing or components that are used to build some components into those environments. So it's really interesting the way it's evolving from different types of verticals.
So who's really driving this in your from a title perspective? I mean, I know not everybody is
Mhm.
chief digital officers, right? Not everybody is
Right.
an OTT. Who do you see driving these
Mhm.
digital transformation efforts most?
Right. It's really, the business. So depending on the space or the vertical that you're in, it's about innovating and finding new direction of where the business wants to run. And so when they hear of these different capabilities, or they have this need, they reach out to some vendor solutions like, hey, we have this particular use case, and we have to come up with an idea, or come up with an approach to drive this new direction for driving that growth and innovating in new ways. Really, the business is creating that demand, and so the solutions out there, the vendors, they see those opportunities and say, well, look, we can address it this way, or here's how we can help drive your growth and taking those next steps to help bring in more of that success into the environment.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I see that. I see. Have you seen where, and this is kind of bridging into our next slide, which is the cyber
Mhm.
considerations. How do you see the conversation going between the digital push and the security push, just in general? Is there
Mhm.
teamwork there mostly, or is it still kind of
Mhm. Yeah.
people are looking to connect their workers, people are looking to connect digital models, but they're not thinking about security yet?
Right. Part of that is gonna depend on the maturity of the program and the relationship between the business side and the cyber. So there will be some companies out there, or some organizations that already have a very good relationship with the cyber organization, and some that are still working through it, and some that don't. So part of it depends on that. But those conversations and those considerations, if as long as we get the cyber component involved, then we can have those early on discussions about the different implications and what we need to consider for protecting those environment. And some examples of those are things like endpoint security. I mean, we hear that on the traditional sense on the IT side, yes, protecting our assets and our data, but it's not just those systems, it's also the IoT devices. With all this proliferation of IoT capability or smart capability being brought into things like in manufacturing or in other areas, you have more connected devices. So the security extends also to those types of components. Another traditional component or area is network security. The same way we do in the IT side, where we think about segmentation and zero trust, still applies into a connected worker environment. We got to think about how we protect those capabilities. Supply chain doesn't change. Supply chain is still part of those considerations. How do we think about protecting the way those different suppliers or vendor solutions come into environment, how they manage their cyber part of the program from their area to the way they work with other fourth parties in that case. Data protection and privacy is another one. Some may have encryption requirements where we need to think about that, but not just encrypting the data. It's also understanding the privacy implications or regulations and standards, if it's GDPR, if it's some other privacy laws. So taking that into consideration with where that data is handled and how it gets transferred. One other one is also around AI-driven solutions. So using AI technology built into some of these tools or security components that are looking at threat intelligence and capabilities and combating those types of cyber attacks through AI.
Makes sense, makes sense. So you bring up a good point. I mean, I think that from we talk about supply chain, whether it's third party, whether it's fourth party, are we talking about the securing of the actual data for some of these IoT devices? Are we thinking about the certifications that these third and fourth parties have on the actual development and secure development lifecycle? Can you dive into a little bit more of the supply chain concerns? Is it on the data side or more of the provisioning side?
It's really all of it, like both. It's inclusive because it's not just the data itself, it's also the product itself with how those products work and what they do, how they communicate, not just from what they do to where they're going, say on the cloud or some application, but where they sit in the infrastructure. And then when it comes to the certifications or compliance, being compliant doesn't mean that you're secure. So you may have the compliance met or some of the certifications met. Yes, that provides a layer of security, but it's also or provides the papers that, hey, yes, we're certified to do this. Yes, we're protected under these kinds of compliance regulations, but it's going beyond that too. Okay, so you can tell me that you built it securely, but is it being used securely? Are the processes in place? Are the behaviors in the right order? Do we have the
Right.
right level of other defense and depth type of approach and considerations that are part of the bigger picture? It's not just one area, it's everything kind of working together.
Makes sense. I see that supply chain in general is an area that is less, I wouldn't say organized, but I would say it's sometimes owned by a supply chain partner. And supply chain is looking at a lot of things, such as vendor risk in general. And they're still the infrastructure sectors about how to use cybersecurity risk. And it falls into multiple groups where we're looking at products. What's the development lifecycle, the product lifecycle there? So what I always find is, do you agree? Let me ask you a question. Do you agree that a lot of this requires at its foundation to connect workers and you got to be a very cloud-friendly environment or company?
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you find that in order to have a more connected workforce, that you have to be more of a cloud-friendly organization, ready to move into the cloud?
Okay. I believe I caught your question. So I believe you're asking if I believe that there's more cloud-friendly connectivity being required for these connected workers.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So I guess it depends on the intent of that use case because there may be some use cases where they have that need to send that data. I mean, for the most part, in the IoT space, most of the data is really going out to the cloud, right? So whether it's a SaaS vendor hosted cloud environment or like your own cloud environment that's managed by organization, but it's about trying to get that data in a more seamless, efficient way that is not just for one or a few devices or sources, but it's something that's being shared and looked or collected from many different sources. So if it's something that's being cloud friendly, I mean, things can be built cloud friendly, but we just got to make sure that it is considered with the right measures of security considerations with how that data is used. So some of that data might be sensitive. If it's sensitive, depending on how that organization defines the classification of the data, whereas to one view, well, I'm only sending output of these metrics. Well, if those metrics happen to be non-proprietary or that's not specific to that can provide insight into what that device does or analytics or metrics that say is profit or revenue generated for that organization, then maybe it's not a big issue that that kind of data gets encrypted in that sense. But it all comes down to how does that organization define the proper level of classification of that data, whether it's something that's considered internal confidential or something that's shareable. So that when you take part of that into consideration and then make it into this cloud component, well, then you got to look at, well, how do we determine the access or how we transferring the data? How are we ingesting this information and being shared across other locations? So there is, yes, like a cloud friendly component, but we got to go beyond that. If it's not just the ease of use for that information, but how do we leverage that data once it's being sent somewhere and where it's being shared across other locations?
Makes sense. And so when you think about some of this data, I can think of all different use cases. When we think about why it's important, are we thinking about, help us understand why is this an
Mhm.
initiative for these companies? Like, why are they wanting to connect more? And then what are
Yeah,
the, obviously, the security implications there? Could you comment on each of those?
yeah, right. So one of the things that with the digital transformation and all these different trends, the AI side, the computing, the IoT, and more smart connected devices, 5G stuff, digital twins, this is all helping to reshape the industry of the way technology is being leveraged to innovate and increase business or profit margins or more kinds of services and the user experience, not just for customers, but even for the workers, the users within the environment. Because when you have that efficiency being built in and you have those areas of how you say better work in that environment, it's shaping how we work, not just in those sites, but then how you engage and provide the experience for consumers, for customers. So the AI piece and AR, VR, these other IoT devices, the digital twins, they are shaping the way we work and the way we provide value to our customers. So we think about that kind of shape shifting trend that is going, but we can't forget about the challenges that still exist. Just because the technology is evolving, we have these new ways of providing connectivity to users within the environment. It doesn't get rid of the problems that we still have around the legacy type of environment. We still have old equipment, if it's OSs, if it's other systems or hardware that just haven't been upgraded or patched. We still have the same challenge of legacy type devices using newer capabilities that are making that kind of connectivity, and that introduces that risk. So when you have these connected workers using this technology or these advancements in the capabilities, they're not necessarily thinking about if I use this the right way or the wrong way, I might inadvertently share this information. That comes through training and awareness. But they're there to achieve a job. They have some goals to do. They have to get their work done. And if there's any way that some kind of technology can provide them an easier way or better way, a more efficient way to get their job done, yeah, there's going to be interest in that. So they're thinking about how do I get this done better and more efficient, and not thinking about security. And it's not an issue. It's not that it's their fault. It's not a problem with them. It's just we just need that kind of awareness on let's think about how we leverage this capability. If we're going to bring it into the environment and it's shaping how we work, then let's consider about inadvertent or those unintended ways that we might divulge information that we don't want to share, or the way we
Yeah.
connect.
Now you bring up a good point, and when you talk about connected worker, I mean, just taking it even bigger to digitization in general, when you talk about old equipment or brownfield versus
Mhm.
new builds, how do you think asset owners are prioritizing the connected worker as they look at their existing plants and retrofitting or kind of building
Mhm.
new capabilities in total? Are they doing them both at the same time, or are they only focusing on some of the new products or new offerings for their clients?
Mhm. It may actually vary, but if they wanna, from the connected worker perspective, they have a need. They look at it from a perspective of, okay, I have to get this job done, or I need to approach it this way to get my job done faster. Now, from the leadership perspective, they may take approach, well, we need to innovate and grow our business in a certain way. Now, the way they prioritize, that might be depending on part of the relationships that they have already within the organizations and even cybersecurity, because if they're not already working with cyber or with the IT side that helps them that provides that kind of input or direction. Hey, if we're going to do it this way, we should think about security through these ABC type approaches or these kinds of considerations. So if the relationship is not already there, they're missing out on some of that input on where do you have that high risk, or if we're going to approach through a use case one or use case two, where can we prioritize based on what we can achieve that's feasible with security in mind, or are they just not thinking about security? And if that is missed out, then they might choose or prioritize based on their demand or business need for that area. But then when you have security comes in and identifies, well, here's a risk, we'd go it this way, and here's some implications I think about technology capabilities that provide security measures on top of that, some kind of controls, that might change the dynamics of where they're prioritizing some of the risks that they address. So the relationship needs to be there. If that's not already there, then they may be prioritized in a way that's missing out component that can maybe delay them further or have to go back to part of the drawing board.
But I think the word of the drawing board is key. I think a lot of frustration I've sensed from some CISOs or TIT directors out there is that ops teams are driving a connected worker. Maybe it's IoT, maybe it's some other digital footprint, but
Right.
they're not thinking through things. So I think keeping it, having a plan is so key. And it drives into our next talking point, which is the risks introduced by IoT and wearables. So could you talk about these risks, but before you do so, kind of lay some examples out of some of the wearables or some of the IoT technologies that you're finding most common within this industrial setting right
Mhm. Right. One, let's think about kind of like some examples, the way they could, some of these wearables, let's say. Um, you have some devices that are like your smartwatches, like your Apple devices and other similar ones. And then some, there's some kind of bands, some that are partly maybe measured here that are put in your chest or something that you put on your head, some kind of hat or whatever it is, some kind of camera. And there's these different wearables that have different use cases they target. And then that might be dependent on the vertical of that organization or that business that they're trying to innovate with. So if there's two types of the way the information, I guess you'd say the way the vendors consider these area. There's vendors who think about security built into the wearables, where they only connect or they only collect the necessary data that they've already determined. Well, we only need to capture this kind of metric about, let's say, your blood pressure or your maybe your heart monitor kind of capability, that information can be sent to some kind of dashboard. So there's some kind of analytics around that. They may they may associate that to that individual based on their name, phone number, or their email, let's say, or some user ID of that company, or it might be just some kind of arbitrary data on the back end that can tie back to the actual user. But then some may approach it where they give all that full information. They collect all the information up front, and that information is being collected to those dashboards. Other parts could be part of GPS tracking, where the wearables include location data, where you are on the shop floor, where you're moving around, and then some kind of sudden movement or anomalous behavior of some trend that you had on normal days that changes and offsets to something different, can be some kind of alert and information that gets sent to those applications or those dashboards. So from a use case that makes sense. That's, it's intended for. It's how they can monitor and better react or react faster to incidents in a shop floor location or they're similar. And that's the intention is, hey, we want to increase our safety incidents. So some kind of technology around that collects that information. Well, that's all great. But now when we think about the risk side is, well, okay, let's ensure that the data is being collected. If it's being sent to say the cloud, then one that's being encrypted, that could be a consideration. But if someone were to hijack that information or compromise that data, could they use that in a way to generate false incidents to kind of offset the balance of the environment? Or could they use that information that may be targeted to specific individuals that they're using for some kind of targeted kind of campaign? So when we think about these wearables, it's really about, only collect or send what is necessary. And if some of that data happens to be sensitive information, could we substitute that data from some kind of arbitrary information that still ties back to the users for the purpose of monitoring them for safety considerations, but one that in the event of some kind of compromise doesn't lead back to personal information that's being shared, or that can provide an attacker with a GPS map of the environment of certain things that are being used to monitor and address in those locations.
So when we think about wearables, is the majority of the use case sending data about the human worker back to a dashboard, or are there other things that those IT devices are?
It depends though. So there is some that are out there that are sending data back to some kind of cloud dashboard. That cloud dashboard might be hosted outside the organization, or it could be something in-house that's built. But there's also other kinds of wearables and other kinds of IoT devices that are communicating with other local IoT devices that may leverage some of that data in parallel or conjunction with other types of systems within the environment. So it just really depends on what that particular use case is, or what that group is working with, where they might have some other kind of IoT connected, robots, or some kind of bot cart, let's say, or some other device that's collecting analytics for the way it moves into the environment and knows where to go, where to turn, where to stop. Maybe some kind of forklift or some kind of device that when it passes through some kind of, let's say, RFID reader, it knows that when it passes through that, there's other metrics information that get collected that maybe spun another type of process. So, and then that information can maybe be converged or correlated to users from a safety perspective, where if it knows that a user is in a certain part of that path or working in a certain area, it maybe take some kind of different action. So depending on how that technology is built or how they're used to correlate with other smart connected devices, it can add a different factor of safety consideration and risk and how we got to consider it.
Yeah, it makes sense. There's this huge, I'm just thinking about governance right now. You're collecting all this different data.
Mhm.
You're probably, if you're a global company, operating in multiple states, in multiple countries, right? And so how you manage all of the different data protection, data privacy, not to mention just pure risk of the data being out there. It seems like we're adding yet another layer of complexity to the security department from a governance perspective.
Mhm.
Because it's for a lot of these, it's for the connected worker, we have the human element in there. Do you see that as yet another kind of stick in the fire on things that a given security officer has to worry about now?
Yeah, like especially like your comment around like other country locations. Another thing that we can think about this from a risk perspective is also the business culture. Not that it's right or wrong, but there's when you have um, your already some programs or some policies in place, and you have already some security awareness that's already there that's being leveraged. But when we think about, well, how's the risk here, not just with the technology itself, something to consider, but even user risk. And user risk in the perspective of culture in other countries that just operate differently, or some that don't have that understanding. Well, why is this really an issue? Where they don't think of that being, well, what's the problem if I'm sending this information? What's the problem if I use it this way and how I connect to the device? Well, if they don't, and it's not their fault, they just don't have the technological background or the security background. So this ties back to, it's a user risk because of maybe some cultural differences in the way the business operates, but trying to get some of that capability and awareness into that. And this kind of ties back to, for, I guess the next topic is really the awareness is how do we help shape that and bring that more of that awareness to the users, to the connected workers. So
Makes sense.
uh,
Yeah, and I think that the whole world right now is contemplating more data in the cloud in the industrial setting. You got
yeah,
maintenance programs, you've got non-productive time detectors, you have scheduling, optimization of different systems, whatever those systems may be. They could be trucks, they could be components of a chemical plant, they could be some sort of components of your overall electrical systems. How much different do security officers need to be viewing connected worker data versus connected systems data? I know that they're being grouped, I think, together by a lot of teams. It's like, hey, that's sending data to somewhere else. Should we look at them differently, Ronaldo? What's your opinion
mhm.
there? Because it's on the theme of security awareness and training. So I propose that question. Data from
Yeah,
humans versus data from systems.
yeah, so we do gotta look at all the different elements and really understand the functional behavior of the way these devices work. One, there's intended behavior, like how are they supposed to work, right? And that's not just the way that one component talks to another component and how they communicate, but where do they sit the environment? So we got to look at things holistically. And another piece to this is the user behavior process is not just how you leverage the tech and how you use it to get your work done, or that provides, you're not exactly using it like to get your work done, but maybe it's metrics collected about you, the way you use it, that provides safety considerations. Yeah, we do have to look at the technology itself, the way these are being connected and what they do, but the user side and how we manage or intend to use those components. So let's say, for example, with having awareness about a capability around the AR VR space, there may be a business case where, okay, we need to leverage augmented reality in our environment to provide training and to provide a user experience on, hey, you may not be physically in the location, but you are connected through this virtual lens or augmented, reality device that gives you the exposure or the experience as if you're physically there. That's great for that kind of training and getting that kind of exposure. But now, from a user perspective, if there's no policy in place or a program that says, when one is how we collect the data or what we do stays localized, that's could be one area. But if something is lacking where a user is allowed, whether it's technological control or security control, or maybe a process control that's lacking, where someone takes that audio feed or that view, maybe does a picture out of that device, and they just post it on social media like, hey, I had this really cool training. Well, that's great, but then what's in that picture? And that picture can have background information of sensitive components about the environment, about maybe there's some kind of proprietary system that's there for the organization. Maybe it's some kind of view that shows the layout of the environment. Maybe some kind of view of an area that is considered um, uh, top secret, or some kind of government classification that shouldn't be exposed to the internet. So that information, and then from an attacker perspective, if that image happens to be shared, and they can get direct public access to it, nothing stopping them from using something like Gen I, or image generation, or not image generation, but an image analysis tool that can read that and use that as a way to learn and do reconnaissance of the environment within seconds versus taking weeks or months. So
Right.
this kind of ties it back to part of that awareness training. It's not just awareness and training on how to use the technology. Yes, you're using it to do this use case to meet the business need, to how we innovate, but the security implications of misusing that data, those images, those recordings, that training, how we offer access into it, or how we share that information out. So we're using it for the right purpose, for driving the business need, but let's think about the unintended consequences we can have if we share this in a way that shouldn't be shared, or give access in a way that shouldn't be given access.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And it bridges to our next kind of question, topic, what are the technologies that can help in this cyberspace? You mentioned a few. It's interesting, we are bringing on solutions to connect the workers, to connect everything. And then we got to bring on new solutions and maybe even new people to protect all of the data that we're now sharing. What are the top, let's say, 2 or 3 things that an organization can bring on from a technology perspective? I mean, I'm always the number one believer that the best set control is training and people, right? Because they seem to be one of the most impactful. They don't protect themselves in the environment. When it comes to connected workers, what do you think the top controls that people need to focus on?
So let's see. So top controls, really, it's okay. So there's many, but I would really narrow it down. We got to really think about, well, what is the functional purpose of these systems, and it's really more like around least privilege approach. From a user perspective, only do what's necessary with that device. So some controls around that. The other one partly related to zero trust, like a zero trust architecture, is these devices should only do what they're intended to do. If their functionality is only to communicate with XYZ application and to this other one or two or few systems in the environment, whether it's local or a data center or in the cloud, then restricting traffic to only those necessary devices, and just give access to what is necessary. So it kind of ties back to your access controls around the user and devices, but also the authentication piece to it. So if only certain users are supposed to use those systems, then they should be the only ones authorized to do that. So controls around user access. Yeah. One other quick one is, depending on some of these IoT devices, or like the AR, VR devices, or other wearables, if there's some way to manage these through some kind of MDM type solution, or another way to manage where you can validate that they have not been compromised physically, say on the device, or through some kind of certification process, like some kind of cert, let's say, or some other way of managing these components, where if they're going to be in your environment, that you know what they are, if they're authorized, and how you control the access into the environment. Um, another big one is also, just very briefly, is around the 5G stuff, because 5G is also becoming an interesting topic and trend, where, okay, we're not talking about the public cellular side of 5G, 4G, but a private localized 5G. And when you move devices from your infrastructure of a wired and wireless network, which we may have visibility to it. Sure, there might be some lacking controls around the OT IoT side, and maybe a lack of some visibility side. But if you have organizations that are already getting to that direction, to gain that visibility and take action on that, that's one thing. But when you start moving some of these Wi-Fi wireless devices to a 5G connected private network within the location, well, now you're taking out those devices from that potential visible location. So we think about the 5G side, we have to think about controls. How do we maintain the security visibility and the controls around the 5G component? Sure, you have these vendors capabilities. Oh yeah, well, we can provide security and map to this SIM card and lock access and do this. Okay, that's great. But you've now taken out a big picture that I've had or could have had into a now private 5G. So we need some form of integration to work with our
Right.
security tools in our environment or our cloud.
It goes back to your original comment about planning, architecture, alignment. I mean, I see the biggest frustration is when somebody tries to bring in some connected piece or some new technology where they have fun. Not only just the process, but the entire life cycle, data management, security in general, personnel, the training, how we're going to do all those things. That's where it gets really. I think that's where the best security plans come from. And I think that's what you're talking about. I think you might be frozen. So, ladies and gents, we're just having a quick moment here on our side of the speaker. Give us just a moment. So, he'll be coming back. As we think about the connected worker, we think about what we were just talking about, about the overall network systems. I love the idea of user and access control. I love the idea of training awareness as two primary controls. But I also think that some element of supply chain management, we talked about that earlier, where you're thinking about where in the cloud you're going to go and who's securing that data when it's there, whose responsibility is it. And then also one that I think can always be implemented more and more is security of incident response. How do you implement some sort of incident response functionality, disaster recovery? Because once you start thinking about one element of your overall network being compromised, potentially being compromised, I don't think a lot of people think about that particular data model as something that want to be secure or taken advantage of by the very sector. We give just a moment to finish up, but if our guest is not able to go, we're almost at time. Let's see if we had further notes. We will go ahead and call it there, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ted. This is the Business of Cyber Series. We'll be joining live again next week and the following week. We've got a really big laundry list of folks that are going to be coming on, talking about 5G, 4G, talking about AI, also talking to a couple of different systems from some different environments. So we appreciate your time today. Sorry for all the technical difficulties. We'll be back next week with the Business Cyber Show. And thank you for helping us for your time, for your insights. And if you have any questions, go ahead and reach out on Business Cyber Series on LinkedIn and follow up with questions. Thanks.